you about to have a shoulder or knee arthroscopic surgery? If that's the case, then definitely stay tuned because I want to tell you a little story. And the story starts with two of my good friends who just had those surgeries done last week. And I want to tell you all the things that they were doing right, as well as a couple of things that they weren't doing so right. Welcome to InjuryGuru.com. I'm Carla Schimmelfinnig, registered physical therapist, and this is a section in the website where I typically answer a common question. However, this week I thought it would be good to just give you a little story, tell you a story about my two friends who have just had these surgeries done, and just be able to share a little bit of their experience with you if you are planning on having this done. The first character in my story is Jamie. Jamie had a knee scope done, and that was for a torn meniscus. So when I arrived at his house about 24 hours after surgery, I just asked him usual questions, and Jamie was doing really well. He didn't have a lot of swelling. He didn't have a lot of pain. He had little to no pain, except when he would try and walk on that leg. He was not using any crutches, so again, he just was doing really well. When I got to his house, though, he was sitting up and already back to work on his computer. And he had his leg propped up over a couple pillows, but again, he was sitting. And when I asked him how long he had been sitting, he had told me he was sitting for about 3 hours. And so, of course, my inner therapist took over, and I just had to give him a little lecture. I told him how his main job for the next 72 hours, or the first 72 hours, is just to rest, ice, elevate, and do the exercises that he was told to do. Jamie knew that to properly elevate, his heart had to be lower than his leg. So great for him. I was really glad he knew the answer to that question and knew the proper way to elevate. I just had to emphasize that is exactly what he needed to do in order for the process to go as smooth as it could. And so he would have a little amount of pain and less swelling as possible. Jamie told me, though, that he was planning on returning back to work in 2 days. And for Jamie, that means getting on an airplane and going to visit a client. So again, I just reassured to him that what his main job was. And if he followed those rules, it would make returning back to work and getting on an airplane and going to see a client, it would make that much more tolerable. The second character in my story is Tom. Tom had a scope, an arthroscopic surgery to the shoulder, and Tom was no stranger to this type of surgery. He had had the same procedure done on the other shoulder about a year and a half ago. And when I got to Tom's house about 24 hours after surgery, he was in his recliner, reclined a little bit, and had some ice on that shoulder, which is a great thing. We took off the bandage on the bandages on his shoulder, because that's what the doctor wanted us to do. And I gave him some exercises to do, a whole series of exercises that he needed to start with. And Tom had a couple questions for me, too. His first question was, would it be okay if he went out with his family for Mother's Day? It happened to be Mother's Day weekend. I was seeing him on Saturday. Mother's Day was the next day. And I told him that it would be okay as long as he listened to his body and he felt okay. So if he didn't feel good, I really didn't want him going out for lunch. But if he felt okay, that would be all right. And he just needed to make sure he watched all of his activity that day to make sure he wasn't overdoing it. The other question he had was just about those waterproof Band-Aids that you can put over your incisions. He was told that it was okay to use those Band-Aids, but he didn't know, was he supposed to replace that with different Band-Aids, or could he just leave those shower-proof, waterproof Band-Aids on all the time? And my answer to him was just use those shower or the waterproof Band-Aids when you're going to take a shower. And as soon as you get out of the shower, take those off, throw those away, and then put on some just regular old Band-Aids. So the moral of the story is this: make sure you ask lots of questions, be really informed, listen to your doctor and whoever else gives you instructions, so the nurses or the therapists, and just make sure that you listen to your body, that you're resting, icing, elevating, and doing your exercises for those first 72 hours. If you follow all those instructions and rules, then I can guarantee you that the whole process is going to go a whole lot smoother. You're going to have less pain and less swelling, and then it'll be even sooner that you get back to doing the things that you need to do and want to do on a daily basis.